Hello and welcome to the Kennet and Avon Canal at Hungerford in Berkshire. It is freezing, -2 degrees Celsius, but that has not put paid to the work I've come to see being filmed today. You see, the canals of England and Wales are very, very shallow. They were all dug by hand by an army of labourers using picks, shovels, wheelbarrows and so on in the mid-1700s, and because of that, they were only dug as deep as they needed to be to float a barge full of cargo, whether it was tons of coal or steel or wood or flour or whatever else they were transporting. And that means the canals are maybe 3 or 4 feet deep. But over time, they silt up. Leaves from the trees, grass cuttings, all sorts of other stuff floats to the bottom, turns into this nasty, mucky mud. And so as you're going along in your narrowboat, you can quite often feel the base plate of the boat scraping along the mud. And that means the canals need dredging. And that's what I've come to see being done. This dredging work begins at Dunmill Lock and stretches for around 1.5 miles to Marsh Lock on the other side of Hungerford. What's going on is best seen from the air, with flat barges full of dredged silt being unloaded by an excavator on the towpath into a series of lorries that shuttle it to a dump site. Further up, almost hidden by the trees, the actual dredging is done by another excavator on a floating platform, scooping great dollops of muck into another barge. Around 6,000 cubic metres of silt will be taken out in this operation.
A key part of how we decide where to dredge is the feedback from our customers on which areas need it most urgently. So our customer inquiries lines, both the national contact details on our website or the local regional customer inquiries emails are the places to go to, and the colleagues there will then ask you some key questions about the nature of the problem that you encountered so that we can determine how big that problem is and how we might best go about dealing with it. Part of my job is sifting through that customer information and deciding which jobs we can tag into a project like this and do a large-scale dredge, and which jobs we need to actually get the contractors to come out with smaller kit and take just a small quantity of material, say where a feeder comes in or something like that. We go round the network, or the team go round the network, roughly on about a 4 to 6 year programme, so some areas get looked at more frequently, some areas take longer to get looked at. But it means we've got a survey that's only 4 or 5 years old for pretty much the whole network, and that helps us to decide which bits are silted up worse than the others. But then we very much rely on customer comments to support that. So if my survey says somewhere silted up but nobody is complaining, then I will not dredge it. Because there are plenty of places where people are concerned about the state of the channel, and we'd much rather prioritise those.
Canberra Trust do that survey with their team years before we come to site. That allows them to work out which canals they want to dredge. They then come to us and we carry out a dip survey, which is essentially a little dinghy boat that goes up and down the canal and physically dips with a staff the depth of the soft silt.
All that surveying results in graphs like this one, which shows a cross-section of the canal, with lines indicating the depth to the top of the silt as well as the actual base of the canal. From these measurements, the operations team can work out how much silt needs to be dredged and where from. And the technology guiding the person operating the dredger is very much in the traditional style of the canals. In other words, it's quite low-tech.
Our operators are very experienced. They've done it for many, many years, so they have a very good understanding of what we do. Essentially, it's as simple as having a mark on the arm of the excavator that shows the depth that they need to dig to.
Marks aside, I'm told that the operators are so good that they can feel through the controls when the bucket reaches the bottom of the canal. Whilst there's some fairly big machinery in use on this site, not all dredging work requires the same level of gear.
The contractors also have very small amphibious dredgers that they can track into the canal, that can shift much smaller quantities of material direct onto the bank for us. In some cases we can use long reach excavators on the bank to direct dredge. We can also use much smaller kit than this on the narrow canals. Because the Kennet and Avon is a broad canal, they're using large hoppers here, which obviously wouldn't fit on most waterways. So there's a range of kit available to scale to the job that needs doing, and there's kit bigger than this, obviously for places like Gloucester Docks and the River Severn and the River Trent. Then we use much much larger pieces of equipment than this because the scale of the waterway is bigger.
Shuffling the barges around from dredger to the offload site on the bank is this wonderful little tug, which either pushes or pulls or otherwise manoeuvres the boats around, making sure there's full loads in front of the towpath excavator and empty barges ready for the dredger. One of the most frequent complaints you hear from boaters is that there just isn't enough dredging done, so you may not be surprised to hear how often different stretches get attended to.
Every canal and every length of canal is different. So depending on the nature of the land alongside it, the vegetation, whether there are streams coming in, whether the banks have been protected or not. So some of them might need dredging every 10 years, some of them might not need dredging for 30 or 40 years. On average, we think about every 20 to 25 years, so it's kind of a once-in-a-generation event to dredge most bits of canal. There are some bits that need doing quite quickly, so here on the Kennet and Avon, because you've got a river in close proximity, where the river comes into the navigation, some of those sections will need dredging much more frequently. And on our river navigations, like the River Severn and the Trent and some of the freight navigations in Yorkshire, we're dredging those every year because the river wants to have a channel that actually isn't navigable, and so we have to maintain bits of it where it wants to deposit the silt, but we want a channel big enough for boats.
Being a former boater who liked to moor in quiet rural locations, I often found a lack of depth near the edges of canals, so you couldn't get into the side to tie up, was quite frustrating. But it turns out there's a good historical reason for this.
We have to remember that some of the canals were built like that in the first place, that they were shallow dishes. Working boats would never have expected to moor everywhere along the length. They would only have moored at lock approaches, at bridge approaches, or at proper defined moorings and wharfs. So actually the idea that we can just moor anywhere we like is quite a modern change. And if the banks haven't been bank protected, then actually you should not expect to be able to get into the bank at all. That's what gangplanks are for.
With a regular procession of lorry loads of muck being taken away, you are no doubt wondering where it then gets disposed of. The CRT can't exactly chuck it over a neighbour's fence and hope no one notices. Quite apart from the legalities, the volumes involved would make that a smidge impractical.
We dredge an average of about 100,000 cubes a year at the moment, so 100,000 cubic metres, that's about 140,000 tonnes. A big chunk of that is on the river dredging, so some of that gets released back into the river and is carried away by the water. Some of it goes into our own lagoon sites, so on the River Weaver at Acton we have a huge lagoon that's about 14, 15 acres, and that we offload our material directly into that. Here on the K&A, the material's going off-site, but it's going to an agricultural field where it'll be spread as an agricultural improver and ploughed into the land. And that's pretty much returning material from where it came, as obviously the bulk of the siltation on a rural canal like this is material washed off the land back into the canal.
That disposal field lies about a mile away from the canal, and it's here you get an idea of the sheer scale that dredging involves. You see the cars and machinery in the corner, and here's the field being covered in vast amounts of silt.
It's formed of organic material, mostly in this area. It includes valuable nutrients which are good for the soil. We do a chemical analysis on the sediment to prove that it's going to be suitable and beneficial to the receiving soil, and it's a good soil conditioner.
When the lorries arrive, they first reverse onto the site. Then the container is lifted to offload the muck into a hole dug out for the purpose. However, as any canal boater knows, there's not just silky smooth mud down below, but all kinds of stuff, from bicycles and shopping trolleys to mobile phones and dropped windlasses. Those obviously can't be spread on the field, so they need to be filtered out. That's done by scooping the silt from the dump hole and dropping it through this machine, which jiggles it around on a grating. That sieves out any larger chunks which fall to the side and can be removed for landfill. The soft mud drops straight through the grate, goes up the conveyor belt and off the end into another pile, which is then pushed around the field by a mud plough. Despite the benefit to the farmers of the nutrient-rich silt, it turns out they still make a charge to the Canal and River Trust.
There is a legal exemption that allows us to put the material on agricultural land, providing it's beneficial. But although the farmers receive that benefit of fertiliser, of course, in the normal course of their work, they'd be quite happy to not have us on their land, and so they do demand some payment. So yes, everything costs, unfortunately.
And as you might expect, it's the cost that prevents more of this useful work being done.
This is part of an £8 million programme of works nationally, which we're managing. The value of these works alone, it's just 2.5 kilometres, is a tad under £400,000. So it's a big chunk of money.
We'd all like to do more dredging, but we have to spread the amount of money that we have on maintenance across all of the activities. There's no point me dredging all of the canals out so that there isn't a gram of silt in there. If all of our locks and bridges and embankments and aqueducts have failed, then there'd be nowhere to boat to and no water to boat on. So it has to be a balance of the available resources across everything. We currently spend between £7 and £8 million a year on dredging, which is about 7 or 8% of our annual maintenance spend in total, and that's enough to keep the network going. Yes, we could spend more. Yes, it would be great if we could spend more on that, but then other parts of the network would suffer as a result. So at the moment, that's the balance that we have.
We'd all like to see more dredging, I'm sure, but that would mean either the government needs to put more money to the CRT, donations to the charity would need to rise substantially, or boaters and other canal users would have to pay more, which is never going to go down well. For the time being, we'll likely have to cope with what we get. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.